supporting her and working to help provide some suggestions over time. So it seems to be going well. There hasn't been a change in the number of buses available to us, so we're still looking at the same numbers. Dee did let us know that, while they're trying to find new drivers, if someone doesn't already have a license, it's going to take at least 2 to 3 months for them in order to get that license. So that's still just, I think, a similar problem. Jeff Bunyan, our athletic director, had sent me an update as to the impact on some of the athletic teams. He said that last week they had, they needed 30 buses over the week. They got 24, so it impacted 6 teams. And they're working with Dee to talk about, when they have options, they're going to try to not have it impact the same teams. Because they're going to try to spread around, but the idea being is that, it needs to be it's determined specifically by where they need to go and what's available, right? So it's not necessarily something that they have a lot of choices with. I did have a parent reach out and ask questions about what the expectations were when students are carpooling to the games, and so Mr. Bunyan did say that, they are expecting students to still wear masks, and they're going to try to keep windows open even in the cars. It's not the same mandate that exists with the federal law, but they're going to try to still be consistent with that. So I think that'll be helpful as well. So that's kind of an update on the traffic and the bus situation still. So we haven't seen a lot of movement there, but there is no wait list. The students who weren't able to get passes initially, that's all been resolved. Jen Piper has let me know that that's been moving forward. Since they still need the multiple runs in the morning, they're still trying to not get the students there before 7 o'clock, but it is at 7 o'clock for those high school students in order for them to combine them with those middle school runs. And then just some additional updates in terms of activity in the schools. Detective Bernardin was able to go to Blanchard, and so they did have grade level assemblies where he was able to do some of the cyber security online choices, talking about, he was even talking with them about bullying, harassment, and so I think as he's been going to different schools to work with them, he was able to do that over at Blanchard. They were able to spread everybody out in their auditorium and have everybody organized by class so they were able to make sure that they were effectively doing any contact tracing. But I thought that was something that I just want to make sure that you were aware of and that they shared with you. I was able to see International Dot Day. If you're not familiar with that, how many of you are familiar with International Dot Day?
No.
So, okay, good. So I said in my my update for WestfordCAT for people to look it up or talk to your elementary school kids. It came from, I believe it's Peter Reynolds is the author and artist, and it's basically about encouraging students to make their mark. It's a great story, but it's been something for a little while now, and so the majority of the schools all found ways to the elementary levels to celebrate that, and I was able to witness some of that. It was fantastic because I was talking with kindergarten students who told me the whole story of it. They had watched the video, and then they were the ones, they were really excitedly explaining to me what it meant to make your mark, which was fascinating to hear from kindergartners. The Miller School let me know that they're working with the Start With Hello, which is part of the Sandy Hook Promise program, and so next week they're going to be focusing on kindness and acceptance, which I know the other schools will be looking at that as well, which I thought is great. I have one school left. My Wednesdays have been really effective. I've been able to get into all of the schools. I spend at least 2 hours at the school meeting with the principal, going to classrooms, visiting with students and teachers. The one school that I have not seen in September is the one that I've spent the most time in the last 7 years, so I decided to leave Stony Brook for last. So I'll go to Stony Brook next Wednesday, and then I'll repeat the process by going back to Abbott again as well too. So that's been fun, and it's been informative for me. So I've enjoyed that, and I'm going to be able to keep that happening. I've been able to have some virtual meetings, been able to have people come and meet me there as well too. So I've been able to still add things to the calendar, which has been helpful. The Last thing I want to share with you is just you're aware of the WA mascot update that I sent out. So we did have our DEI meeting on Thursday, and Catherine was a part of that, and Alicia, who can't be with us tonight, was a part of that. We had a number of things to talk about at the meeting, and it was hard to get all of the things in there because of, I think, the conversation that was taking place. But what I said in my letter was, that even within this group where everybody is sort of focused on creating this space where we should be able to, have open conversations about various things. It was difficult to have consensus just because people were seeing different questions that they had about it. So we're going to keep talking about it. And then I'm anticipating that in November, I'm going to have some more clear recommendations to talk with you about. But that is what I have for the update.
Great, thank you. Next up is school committee updates. Does anybody want to?
Did you want to see if anyone has questions?
Oh, does anybody have questions? I thought people would just jump in if they have questions. I know this group, but very polite of you, though.
I just wanted to circle back to the athletes with the busing. I know it's a tough spot, but have we thought about the impact on the athletic fee that they're paying and how busing is included in that, and that's being impacted?
So we're looking at that. I mean, I do think the fees are covering a lot of things, right? So the busing is one piece of it, but there's more to it than that. I'm still trying to see if they're going to be able to, provide more adequate buses. And I know Mr. Bunyan has also looked to even rearrange some of the contests that can happen under lights, to see if he can organize things in different ways that it might allow us to utilize the transportation that we do have. So I think that is still more flexible than what we see as the morning run. That seems to be a little bit different. So I don't have a really solid answer for you yet.
Yeah,
but
and I know it's something that we've talked about, that there, it's kind of it's being worked on, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to say, like, this is a problem, we're gonna fix it until we know. So maybe at the end of the season, we could talk about how much impact it ended up being and see if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Other questions? Okay. School committee updates. Any subcommittee liaison type of updates from anyone? Gloria?
Alicia isn't here this evening, but she was elected chair of the policy subcommittee, so she'll be giving these most of the time. But we did have our first policy meeting. We talked about kind of a lot of things that are on the plate for this year, and how we would organize that and how we would kind of divide up kind of some of the initial research and work about how to get through that. We talked about some of the things that have kind of been outstanding, ongoing discussions, things that have been previously, flagged in Airtable, and also items that we need to check through the MASC kind of list of here recommended things that all school districts take a look at and make sure you're up to date. So there's a lot on that list, but a lot of energy about moving policy items forward this year. We also talked a fair amount about how there is a fair amount of overlap between what policy needs to be doing and with what the various DEI groups, town and school, are both doing. We have some handy liaisons in Catherine and Alicia, who are also on the school DEI team and are also on policy. So we hope to be able to use that conduit so that we can support whatever the district's DEI efforts are from a policy stance, but not necessarily overcomplicate those complications that are happening elsewhere. We just want to keep that conduit of information going so that we can support from a policy angle. And The other kind of overlap that we talked about is how to deal with the new, still relatively new, it's only been in existence a year, finance subcommittee, and how we might deal with financial policy updates, and should those come out of the financial subcommittee, or should those come out of policy subcommittee? But then how would the logistics of that work? So we think that's still an ongoing conversation. We'd like to talk to finance about that, but we just think it will clarify things to kind of talk about that early on, to make sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. So that's, so a lot of it was really organizational discussions for the year, but we're looking forward to an active year on policy.
Thanks.
Did I forget
I
anything,
think you
Catherine?
got
Did I-
everything nailed. There was a lot of work done that day. Good work.
Other updates from the committee? There's a finance meeting, is that what you're gonna say?
Go ahead.
There's a finance meeting tomorrow, I believe.
Subcommittee meeting virtually tomorrow at 3:30 p.m., yep. Agenda.
Agenda's been posted?
Yep, a link
With a
through
link.
the town website.
Yep, that'll be good. And Valerie?
I was, sorry. I was gonna say, I'm on the liaison for Capital Planning Committee. We had a meeting, and special town meeting is coming up on October 16th at 1 p.m. A plea to attend that to anyone watching. Capital Planning reviewed the few projects that are being presented at special town meeting. There is one for the schools on there. It's a schematic design related to the Blanchard Middle School roof replacement. So that's the only thing on there that really relates to schools, but just an update that is on there, the warrant, and should be closed tomorrow night's select board meeting.
Great. And we need a quorum at special town meetings, correct? So we do need 200 people to show up, so please try to make that
1 p.m.
1 p.m. on the
Saturday 16th on the
October 16th.
WA field.
Out in the field. I hear the weather's gonna be really nice that day. I'm just kidding, we don't know what the
Coming.
weather is that day yet. Last year, we had ice on the tables and seats when we got there, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Special town meeting? That was
Yeah.
the fall one, right? That was about the same day. It was, I think it was the 18th last year or something like that.
Sorry, I do have one more update. I don't mean to hog the microphone, but I don't know if it was planning to come up somewhere else, but select board, anyone that following along has been talking also about the American Rescue Plan Act, and it's also on our agenda for tomorrow's finance subcommittee meeting to kind of start making some sort of list of what we see as needs from the school's perspective. So, and I know the ESSER 3 funds are on the agenda, and people may have filled out that survey with specific things in mind, but this is just a reminder that there's other funding out there, and so if you had something specific in mind, you know, from residents, we're open, you know, we're kind of brainstorming and making lists, so please feel free to reach out.
And I think we will be touching on that in the
Okay,
COVID
great.
update a little
Sorry.
bit maybe.
Yep.
So, nope, that's great. Our student representatives, oh wait, they're caucusing.
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Okay, so the way I would describe the school right now is just active. There's a lot of things running simultaneously. Big change from last year. So definitely it's new experiences as there's different people in different places of leadership now having to plan these school activities that have been done for years, but we took a break last year. So yeah, everything's going very active. Sports are running, clubs are running in full swing. We're gearing up for our spirit rally soon, which is just a nice start to the year. So that's exciting. It gets everybody sort of together in one place, so that's exciting. We just had the Cotil, and that went well. We're all figuring out our homework situation with the teachers, because I think last year we were very used to everything being online, and you know, if it says it's due by 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. or by the end of the day, you know, that means we have the full day to do it. So, but like obviously now it's not the case. Like you have to bring it into school, and it's due that morning. So just sort of figuring out how homework is going has been a little bit interesting. Navigating that is, we're so used to now using Google Classroom instead of like writing down agenda books. And you know, some teachers think it's for the better. Some teachers would like to just go back to sort of announcing the homework and you writing it down. So we're sort of navigating that. But I think we're figuring it out well. And then the last thing was the mascot decision definitely, or not the decision, but the news definitely sparked a lot of buzz in our school, which is expected. But obviously there was a petition. There's always petitions made. In every scenario, there's petitions made. But I know the students felt very strongly about it. So that was just another update as everybody was talking about it the next day. So I thought it was important to bring up. Yes, but that is all. Very active school right now.
That's great to hear. And it's good that people are engaged, that the students are engaged on that and thinking and talking about that.
Yes.
I think, that's a big part of it. So
Yep.
keep us updated and we'll keep you guys updated.
Yeah. Yep. There's a lot of engagement with that petition, so
I had like 400 signatures.
Are we going to see this petition soon?
I mean, I could probably find it.
Hey, I'm not asking for no.
Um,
I'm sure it will be sent to us at some point, but yeah, 400.
there's definitely more than
400 's a
400.
lot.
There was
Yeah,
more than
there's
400,
It was
definitely.
like when I saw it, it was at 400.
I'm
But,
surprised we haven't seen
later
it.
it was, I'll see if I can pull it up, but
Yeah.
it's reflective of a huge
Yeah.
sentiment shared by the student body
Okay.
that the mascot should not be changed.
Okay.
Well, I did have a question
Yeah.
on that topic. Because the ghostwriter posted on their Instagram, I don't know if you guys see those posts, but
We do.
Ghostwriter posted on their Instagram with an update saying they were going to survey the student body, yes or no, like changing the mascot, and then that we would vote on a new design if yes. But I didn't hear those updates
Right.
from anyone else, and then later I saw somewhere on Facebook they
Yeah.
were saying that was incorrect.
So yeah, there's also, that's what I was talking to my parents
Yeah.
about. There's a good amount of, I feel like, misinformation spread about it. So
Yeah.
there needs to be just like a direct channel on one source that clearly states, which I'm sure there is, but it probably needs to be publicized more because I think there's a lot of misinformation being spread about it. And then obviously students take one thing and it just spreads like wildfire.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I ask if you read what was sent out on Saturday?
I did not.
Where would it have been sent?
I sent it to everybody. So it went to all families. It's posted on the website.
Did it go to our Gmail accounts?
That's a good question.
'Cause I
And
don't believe it
for
did.
a lot of students, if it doesn't come through our Gmail, most of the time I don't think we really see them. I think
Good
a lot of
question.
time, my parents see this stuff and
Yeah.
then pass it on if they
that could
think.
be.
So we might need to figure out how to make sure that the information gets directly to the
Yeah.
students. Because right now on the website, there is an update that I posted on Saturday
Yeah.
Right.
that clarified some of the ambiguity as to
Yep.
where we were at. So we should probably, that would be helpful. And I do know, the ghostwriter reached out to me specifically, and I was answering questions via email, kind of clarifying some things that they had said originally. They had taken the recommendation, but they hadn't necessarily included the conversation that took place at the school committee
Right.
during that meeting. And so there is more clarity out there. We need to figure out how to, if you can help, just if people talk to you,
Yep.
direct them to those,
Mm-hmm.
to that,
Okay.
but we should figure out a better way to make
Um,
sure that students get access to that.
I think in the email too, it would be helpful to genuinely encourage people to sort of not call out, but just highlight the misinformation or help to stop spreading it. Just because, I think it spreads like wildfire. And
I will say one of the things that I say in that post is
Right.
I remind all of the parents who and families and guardians who might be reading it that we spend time trying to talk to students about their digital footprint. That everybody should kind of remember that, because there has been some online arguments between people throughout this whole process, and so I think that would be a helpful thing for people to remember that.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because even this is just not very clear sort of issue.
Yeah.
Like this one especially is just all the ideas are very widespread. Even students that I know are very politically active in racial justice issues. I myself am politically active in racial justice issues, or I try to be as a student. I know they feel differently on this issue. So I don't know, It's obviously up to you guys, but there's a lot of opinions for the other side on this case, so yeah.
I do think that just one of the things that I know Dean Murphy shared with me recently was just even talking about the history of the conversation. And when we talked about those survey results, and there were questions about the participation, throughout the survey. One of the things that she shared with me was that from her perspective, when the conversations were even happening, a lot of students weren't even aware, right? So we've talked about the idea that the conversation's been going on for a while, but I think you bring up a good point where there are actually a lot of students who weren't even necessarily aware last year. I think now more people are aware. More people are engaged right now than they were originally, because we were trying to come back to school in a very strange environment. We were trying to work through our pods and our hybrid and this and that. And at the same time, we were also trying to engage students in discussions about social justice.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right.
Yeah,
I think it was difficult at times. And you had talked about participating. So like you know how that was going on. And do you feel like there are more people talking about it now than who talked about it last year? Just even the whole thing, regardless of their opinion about it?
I would say so, but I also think that there's a hesitance to speak on the issue from a good amount of people in our community. And rightfully so. Like, some things are not, or I believe some things sometimes it's not our place, and then other things you can speak on it respectfully. But I think it goes back to the idea that, like, we're not really taught that much from a young age, I guess, about how to handle race, and like, because we can't just ignore it. Like, it's not like we don't see color. That's not a thing. Or it shouldn't be a thing, because we definitely are different. But like, we should know how to have conversations around that. And I remember freshman year, the DEI committee did start, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. Nobody spoke. But I think that the more that, we normalize it, the more students can sort of speak up respectfully and still give their opinion while, like, not being, not harming any sort of group or anybody like that. So I think that's sort of what it goes back to. But I think that definitely people are talking about it more, but there's very, very strong opinions, and there's no sort of, like, in between.
Right. That's interesting. Can I ask you, I have actually a couple of questions now that we're talking about this. I'm curious and you obviously won't know specifically, but do you have a sense of, like, what percentage of the students know about this from, watching our meeting versus reading the ghostwriter versus just they heard it from somebody else?
I think the majority of people see it from the ghostwriter or just hearing it.
Okay.
I've heard some people talk about, like, watching the meetings, but for the most part, I think students really only watch the meetings when something big is going on.
Yeah, they
Like,
mostly
when we
get
had
it from
our
Instagram.
sports discussion.
Yeah.
I know.
They're not
everyone
all
was
home
watching.
right now
Yeah.
watching the meeting right now?
Our
It's not-
feelings are
it's
not
not
hurt.
what they're
Our feelings, I'm
choosing to
just more
watch.
curious. I was actually mostly curious with the
Yeah, I
ghostwriter,
think
like
it's
whether
lot-
that's a good
the
source for
ghostwriter
people.
is it's pretty big
Yeah.
in school. I think
The
That's
it's
ghostwriter is solid
Yeah.
journalism.
Yeah.
That's where I get a lot of
The
money.
ghostwriter is where we're
They
getting.
have a really good
yeah.
online
They
presence.
post a
Everybody
lot of
relies on it.
updates about the school, and so that's how students, and then it takes like a couple people to see it, and then it spreads.
Yeah.
That's how, like, when we're walking to our classes, it spreads. Or lunch, did you hear what they decided last night? I remember hearing that conversation many times. Had to clear up some misinformation though, because a lot of people take one thing and then
Yeah.
they want to change the mascot without, like, seeing the other sort of factors around it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to there's the announcements video channel thing, right? Would that be something that you think people would be open to listening to a short segment
Yeah.
about the history or something?
I mean, we
Mm.
kind of, like, have to watch the announcements.
I
so.
think that maybe a short segment of history, I don't think people would
I
necessarily
think a lot of people
watch.
kind of zone out.
Okay. See, this is good to know.
But I think that giving a quick announcement
Yeah.
on not the history, but what the decision is, will clear up a lot of controversy in school.
Okay. Ming-Chen?
I think what Magna talk about is actually a lot of the sentiment as a person of color I have is like those conversations a lot of times is difficult, but the thing with those conversations is like people are afraid to talk about it because when people talk about it, sometimes people got criticized. No matter how respectful they're talking about it, they will actually really actually smother the conversation because you're going to be actually labeled something. I don't think that's healthy in our society, right? And I think that's why a lot of students, they have opinion, but probably they don't want to share it, or they don't want to go to that meeting you went to.
Yep.
Because they are afraid, like they're going to be say, hey, how can you say that, right? How can you not say that, or whatever? But people, they have their own experience. So some people may actually say things differently, but saying things differently is not something you should criticize about. I think this is what actually a lot of people, they don't want to talk about it.
That's why I think that like starting these talks about race is actually important to start in middle school, not when we first reach 9th grade and then we first start our advisory and that's when the DEI. Like these conversations are really important to start putting in like 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, because these issues are like very real when you come to high school. But if you don't know how to talk about it even, it can be so incredibly uncomfortable. And one thing I know, my opinion is out of this statement, but I know that the white population in our school is definitely there. It's a majority, so you can't completely ignore it, but they feel, from at least the white students that I've heard, they sort of feel almost like they don't have a part in this conversation because they're not a person of color. But so that was just a concern that I've heard. There's some issues I feel as if sometimes one perspective should be taken more into account, but I know that the white students feel like if they maybe had the opportunity, they would speak up, but they've not been asked to. So I think that that's at least a concern that I've heard.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Magna. That's really helpful.
That's amazing.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Okay, we're going to move on to public comment. I don't think we have anybody in the room for public comment, but we do have some people on Zoom who may be here for public comment. If so, go ahead and raise your hand and I can bring you in.
Can you remind them of their name and address, please?
Yeah, I will. If anybody comes in, I will be doing that. I'm not sure we're getting anybody. No pressure. But I'm staring at you 10 right now. I see you. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Well, thanks for being here. It doesn't look like we're going to have any public comment today, so we'll move on to item 5, the consent agenda protocol discussion. Okay, so we haven't really talked about this as a whole committee. You saw it on the agenda. You'll see on our agenda at the bottom, we do have a consent agenda. You've probably seen this in other places, select board or other boards and committees. Consent agendas are a way of streamlining the business of a committee. Basically, the idea is that non-controversial items, which are almost certainly to have, unanimous support by the committee, can be placed on a consent agenda and approved all at once. Couple things that are important to know: if something's on the consent agenda, it can be taken off. So before you even get to that, the chair will ask, does anybody want to pull anything out of the consent agenda? And you can address that either before you handle the consent agenda or after, depending on what makes sense. A couple of other things of note. So obviously, and as you see here, the warrants and our minutes are things that we rarely would object to approving. We may have amendments or questions, and that's okay too. So you can ask questions to items in the consent agenda, and you can agree that something needs to be amended, and it can remain in there as amended. So that's important to note. It doesn't have to be question-free, but it has to be, again, if you think it's something that's going to generate 20 minutes of questions, it probably doesn't belong there, though. But if there's a clarification, something like that, it makes sense for it to be in there. The other thing I would mention, and we talked about this before the meeting, a couple of us, is having the warrants in there. Typically, we're reading the amounts of the warrants that we're approving. And so we've kind of talked about how we want to handle that. And so I think what we're saying might be the right approach. And of course, we need to talk to Nina and to you, if this makes sense, would be to approve it on the consent agenda, but then retroactively add it to the meeting packet so that the public can see the actual amount that was approved, rather than having it read at the meeting. And so if everyone feels like that's a, an okay thing to do, and if that's okay for Nina, if that feels like something she's comfortable doing, we would try that. But we're also open to other, if we need to adjust it or do something differently, we will.
I just want to add on there that, to clarify, those numbers aren't usually ready when the agenda is posted. That's why
Right.
it's kind of like the warrant is usually hard copy with the amounts, because it's ready in time for the meeting, but not when the agenda.
It's a Monday afternoon
Right.
for the payroll
Right.
warrant.
So that's why it would be added after.
Right. But at the same time, anything that's on the consent agenda, the committee should have adequate time to have looked at it and understand what we're consenting to. And so we also have talked about that, trying to get, and Valerie did email out the warrants to us as a committee, and we'll try to get those out as soon as possible before the meeting. The last two things I would mention is the location of the consent agenda. We have it at the end of tonight's agenda. I've seen recommendations that you put it at the beginning. It starts the meeting off with some decisive action, getting some of the stuff out of the way. Plus, if you want to have longer conversations about something, it's a chance to recognize that you want to have those longer conversations and put those earlier in the meeting if you want to do that. And the last thing I would say is that you'll see on our consent agenda, vote required. I know Select Board votes on their consent agenda. Robert's Rules of Order does not require a vote. The whole idea is that we're consenting by not objecting to something being on there. We are consenting.
Mhm.
And so by the chair giving every member an opportunity to remove something from the consent agenda, you're getting that consent. And so we may look at whether it's worth, it speeds things up, whether we want to move in the direction of just not voting on that. I've now spoken more than the time we'll save with the consent agenda, maybe for the whole year. But the reason this came up partially was, you remember that first meeting after summer when we have all those warrants and
Yeah.
having to read all those numbers. You remember that?
I do remember that, yes.
And so, it saves a few minutes there, and it's just a good idea to know that you have, it's a tool, a meeting tool that can really, it can streamline things. And when we have meetings that are going till 9:30, 10 o'clock, we'll take 2 minutes of time savings. Any questions or concerns about that? Gloria?
I'll just add, I, in terms of placement, I think it's completely, at the, discretion of chair and superintendent about where you think it makes sense to put it. I do think it makes sense to take one vote for the full consent agenda. That's what Select Board does. That's what we do at town meeting. I think it has some parallelism, even if Robert's rules might let us. The fact that we're doing it as one vote instead of, what's usually, four or more votes. There's still a time saver there, but I think there's a vote on record. So
Mhm.
I think it's a great idea to add and to start to make use of it. But just in terms of parallelism with other
Mhm.
groups and how they handle it, I think it makes sense to have it be a vote still.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments? Okay, well, we're going to vote on it tonight. We'll try it out. We'll take it for a spin, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, well, thank you guys for bearing with me on that. Next item, I was going to objection that we do an agenda switcheroo, and we move the, I think what's number 3 under business, which is the new superintendent induction program, before the Covet update. Seem reasonable? So we can let Mr. King out of here earlier rather than later.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yes,
Yes, please do.
So I'd
Yep.
love to take just a quick second to introduce Dr. Matt King. While I participate in the new superintendent induction program, I am very fortunate to have him. He was assigned as my coach. I don't know if he feels as fortunate as I do, but I feel I've already learned a lot just working with him in the short time that we've been getting to know each other. And so I'd love to introduce him to all of you and let him tell you all about the new superintendent induction program.
I'm a retired superintendent. I spent 28 years as a superintendent. I started right down the road in Carlisle where I spent 10 years. And after Carlisle, I went to Lincoln Sudbury, where I spent 7 years at the regional high school. And then I moved to Wellesley, and I spent 11 years as a superintendent there. And this is my 6th year in the new superintendent induction program. It's a 3-year program, and over 3 years, there are pillars of it. So I'm going to explain to you what the program is. So each new superintendent, this year there are 37 new superintendents. You know, I was just thinking that I've been to about 800 school committee meetings, give or take some, but I've never been to one where I had a mask on. So this is, it's definitely different. So, but I'm smiling if you can. So there are 37 new superintendents this year. So in the first year of the program, we have approximately 6 hours of coaching a month. And the coaching takes place, some of it is one-on-one coaching, some of it is attending meetings, leadership team meetings, following Chris around in visits to schools, etc. And he and I spend quite a bit of time together during this first year. And so there's the individual coaching, and then there's also content days. So approximately once a month. We used to meet in person. Now we're doing it a bit of a hybrid, some in person and some virtually. And there's a content day. And in the content days, we go over some of the foundational principles of the superintendency and really trying to help people get off to a good start. So in year 2, the one-on-one coaching is reduced. So instead of the 6 hours, it's more like approximately 4 hours. There continue to be content days. And in the 3rd year, there isn't one-on-one coaching, but there are groups of superintendents who meet. We call those consultancy groups. And there are a reduced number of content days. I think what's important to understand about the program, the pillars of the program, especially during this first year, is, really what's our goal? Our goal is to help our colleagues have successful starts to their tenure, and to really address all the issues that there are, and our focus is really on teaching and learning. How do we enhance teaching and learning in your schools? We have superintendents who are coming from outside the districts, and then we have superintendents like Chris who are coming within the district, and they both present challenges. And Chris and I talk about this a lot, that when you come in from within a district, sort of like fish in water. The only way that they know what water is, they have to get out of the water because they're part of the culture. And so we talk about the entry phase of this process. And the entry phase is very intensive. I know that Chris has presented his entry plan with you. And I think of this, it's really like being an anthropologist. What he's doing right now is stepping outside and gaining some perspective and trying to understand more about the culture, especially about things about the culture of Westford that he hasn't experienced or seen as a principal. So what are the norms? What are the values? What are one of my favorite words I like to use is, what are the non-discussables? What are those issues that people talk about privately to colleagues or to neighbors or students, but they don't talk about publicly? Things that have significant emotional impact on people. So go through the process of, as he's doing right now, is collecting a lot of data, interviewing people, doing a lot of listening, and he will, at some point this year, write a report on his entry findings. What did he learn? What are the big issues in the district right now? And then the first pillar is the entry plan. The second is the report of entry findings. And then over the next year, what our goal is to develop a strategy for district improvement, which many places call it a strategic plan. The strategy has a specific focus on teaching and learning. So if you have a strategic plan, it would be embedded within it as part of that. And those are in terms of the outputs of the process would be the report of entry findings and development of the strategy or a strategic plan sometime down the road. The work that Chris and I do together is really about everything that you can imagine that comes across a superintendent's desk. The one thing I had no experience with is a pandemic. So, I mean, in the past 2 years, we spent a lot of time with our superintendents talking about this. For me, one of the great ironies is one of the expressions that I've used for many, many years in this business. I would talk about viruses. I said, like this issue with the mascot. I said, well, it's a virus. You get some that last 24 hours and some that just go on, but I can't do that anymore because the past 2 years. I like to distinguish between problems and dilemmas. Problems have solutions, and dilemmas are complex, often a lot of emotions involved, and they need to be managed. And in the school business, we deal with far more dilemmas than we do with problems. And as school board members, I know that's big part of your lives too. So I'm happy to go on and speaking, but you might have some questions for me, and be happy to. I have an opinion about the consent agenda. I have 28 years experience with consent agendas. I've never seen it where it wasn't in the beginning. It's always been in the beginning. But whatever.
I like that. Thank you. Anything else? If there's anything else you want to chime in on that, we'll take it.
Give us the list.
No, we really appreciate you being here. I know, thanks for coming out in person. I think Dr. Chu already has appreciated, the support that you've provided and the program provides, and I think we all feel better about that in those regards. So I'll open it up to questions from the committee for Dr. King. Yeah, Catherine?
Well, it's kind of, I suppose, to both that entry findings kind of report that Dr. Chu is going to work on as he collects his data. Is that something that is widely available to the public, or that he shares just with you?
No, actually, he would share the first draft with me.
Yeah.
And then he and I would talk about it, and then he would show the draft to the leadership team. Mm-hmm. And then eventually he would write a report that would go to the school committee. It would be a public document.
Okay. So when roughly does that come about? Curious.
Yeah.
So that was in my Act 3.
I can't,
right?
timeline, I can't
Act
remember
3
the
into
timeline.
Act 4. So, I mean, I was hoping to do it earlier I was originally looking at, like, I think I can look up, I think I said in January, and Matt was already telling me that was too ambitious. He was encouraging me to take even longer, to say that it's gonna take a while to get through all the data.
Yeah.
But that's the goal.
Okay.
Valerie?
I know this sort of came up when you did present your entry plan, but I was wondering if you could shed some light on how that entry plan becomes goals for the year. Right.
Well, the entry plan is a goal because participation, the professional goal is around participation in NSIP. So that it falls under that area. The entry findings and developing the strategy or the strategic plan, obviously that has enormous impact on what goals are down the road.
Down the road, yeah.
Gloria?
I don't really have a question, but more of just a thank you. Thank you for the support you're providing for Dr. Chu, and through him, the support you're providing to all of us and to the entire school and broader community. Welcome to spending some time in Westford. We hope you enjoy it, and thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think one question that some of us may have, and you touched on it, is around the strategic development or district improvement plan. And if we could talk a little bit more about the interplay with that and a strategic plan. You kind of hinted that it's not a one-to-one, that one is part of the other. This is our year. Well, actually, last year would have been our year to do a strategic plan for the district. We decided to wait until we had a new superintendent in place.
Right.
So any thoughts you have on how that might work, the interactions between the two?
So, yeah, absolutely. So strategic plans often they're much wider. They might include, typically something on facilities, for example. And I mean, obviously that's very important. The focus that we have on a strategy is around teaching and learning. So, and we talk about, between 3 and 4 major objectives that you would have around teaching and learning, and that would be folded into a strategic plan if that's what your custom is here.
Mhm.
I would say at least half the districts have strategic plans, and many of them, if you look at them though, that there isn't a very strong emphasis on teaching and learning at a granular level that we're talking about it.
Okay.
That what we would like to see.
Okay, that's really helpful then.
But I also know from working with Chris, many of the priorities that you have and goals around social emotional learning, equity, these are all aspirational within our program, and so that you're already doing some of this work, so it's not a question of reinventing the wheel here.
Okay. And those would appear in the development plan? Because they touch on teaching and learning.
The first place it would show up, I think, in the report on entry findings.
Yeah.
Where are we right now, and where do we want to go?
Yeah. So it sounds like process-wise, the development plan would feed a strategic plan. So maybe that gives us a little sense of a timeline. That strategic plan work would come after the district improvement
Right.
plan. And that.
In my short time, I mean, Chris and I met in July, and so July, August, September. September is a long month, isn't it? It always seems like
It's still going.
It always seems like a really long month, but it feels like it's been longer than 3 months. I've been very impressed with what you've been doing here. Your district is, you're really doing an excellent job, and I think your thinking is in the right place. And I think you're fortunate to have your team in place that you do, and I look forward to working with them over the next few years.
Great, fantastic. Other questions?
Actually, just on the last
Yeah.
point you were saying there, Chris, if some of the strategic plan is kind of separate to Dr. Chu's kind of, that it's not necessarily touching on the teaching and learning aspect, can we start even that work alongside,
Mhm.
And then kind of come together rather than maybe waiting to hold off? I just, if it's
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, I think
it
we
might
could
be
look at
worth-
if there are aspects of the work.
Yeah.
That could start ahead, and then we fill in pieces from the district
Yeah.
improvement plan.
Actually, an example of this that we've talked about, Chris, is around facilities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason why you would wait until there's a report of entry findings and
Yeah.
down the road. That's something that you can
We can start.
get going right away.
I think it's also something that we have to talk about, because he brings up a very good point when he says half the districts have a strategic plan that is different than this specific district improvement plan, right? Like, I'm being tasked to look at it in a very specific way through this program, which is going to help us focus very clearly on teaching and learning. We might decide that we don't need to develop a strategic plan in the way we had in the past, and determine that we're developing. So I feel like that's going to be also something that'll come out of this, because to his point, we're not waiting to have the discussion about talking with consultants about our facilities and all of these different pieces that might layer into, I think, an overall district improvement plan.
Mhm.
So I feel like that's something we can continue to discuss and figure out what it is that we want to have.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep.
And, we'll keep having that conversation then, yeah.
Yeah, we like to say you want to go slow so you can go fast. Because too often, what used to happen, superintendents they'd hit the ground and they just would react to stuff. It's like whack-a-mole, something would pop up, and what we'd really like them to do is to really gain a perspective and think strategically about the job. And, you know, what do we want to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years? So, and that's where you come in, because you can support his efforts to do this. The amount of time that he's spending in schools right now that's putting money in the bank. You know, that's where the work really has to happen. And the only way that superintendents can devote the time to being in schools is when the school committee is, the relationship they have with the school committee what makes that possible. So, whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
You mean nagging him?
No, yeah, so far so good. It's been
Yep.
great, and,
Yep.
Yeah,
and
that's
I
awesome.
think we feel good about where we're headed. So
Yeah.
we appreciate the support you're giving, and will continue to give. And come back anytime.
I can watch on TV.
That's right. You don't need to come. Now you know.
I get right.
You get the link.
On YouTube, WestfordCAT.
Yeah, thank you again.
I was telling Chris that when I started, there wasn't even cable TV, and we used to just sit around a table. This is down the road, and that was the meetings. And then when the TVs came, everybody went. Everybody talks to the cameras.
It's a little different. Yep.
A little different.
Absolutely. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Good night.
Appreciate it. Okay, next item would be our COVID update.
Okay, first let me just say that we printed up and posted the previous week's charts just for this meeting because we finally got the dashboard up and going. So I asked Nina, can you print it up just so that everybody can see what this is? I think now the dashboard, we're actually posting the new information on the dashboard on Mondays. So today we had a little bit of a glitch as we were making sure that everything was visible. But now the plan would be that the newest information, this information would be posted on Monday. So I don't intend to print up old information and put it in the packet moving forward if it makes
Mhm.
sense
Yeah.
to you and if you're all okay with that.
Okay, yep.
If we now know what the expectation is that you'll have live numbers on
Yep.
Monday.
Makes sense.
So that being said, I'm going to look at those numbers, which is available right now on the website. We've increased our number of close contacts. Our positive case numbers have actually, they're good. They've gone down a little bit. The change in the close contacts is the nature of which schools some of the positive cases are at, right? So as they tend to be in the middle school or the high school, sometimes they're having a larger impact on students depending on the changing of classes and scenarios like that. There was, the information is accurate as of right now. There was, even this morning, there was a difference because one of the schools had 2 different groups from different grades, different places over the course of a week, and I think the second group of numbers didn't get counted in, so it was saying that we had 7 positive cases and only 7 related close contacts for the week before. I'm trying to look at the dates here, 9/13 to 9/19, and that was actually 19 school-related close contacts. I know there's been a question as to how that works, and I think a number of our positive cases have been outside of school. So we're still reporting it's a positive case, even if that person never came into the building and never actually had any close contacts in school. So that was one of the reasons why, as our positive cases started getting a little bit higher and our close contacts weren't necessarily getting higher, I think there were some questions about that. And it's similar to, well, a lot last year that would happen when we would be reporting on the positive case because it's a member of our school community, but that person may or may not have actually even come into school and had any contact with anybody. So I feel like that kind of makes, if that provides some clarity. To date, we still have 0 in-school transmission. So none of our close contacts from school have translated into an individual becoming positive. So that has not happened yet. I want to look at the information here as we're just talking about the numbers. I kind of took it out of order, and I'm talking about the COVID case numbers before I talk about the testing in schools. But are there any questions about the data, about the cases that I can answer? Yes, Meech.
So I'm just a little bit curious. Is like I know. So a couple of weeks ago, one of the elementary school they had a like all student assembly. Do we have any like cases or close contacts from that event?
No.
Okay.
We did not have any from any of the schools that did have assemblies, whether at the beginning of the school year, whether it was one of the elementary schools or when the middle school had it. There was no, there were no positive cases, and there was no need to do the actual contact tracing afterwards.
Okay. Yeah. Good to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it possible, Dr. Chu, to add, you know, on that page 4 where we're just given the little chart of like positive cases, close contacts, school-related close contacts, is it possible to add, you know, of if we get any close contacts of those, do any test positive? Like, I mean, you're telling us now at the meeting, but I'm just curious, is there a way to?
So we, in the internal document that the nurses share with us, we have that column that's saying, is it literally reads, it has a close contact transition to a positive case.
Yeah.
Which is how I can say confidently that it's been no, because they've been tracking all that. We'll look at that. The concern is, and right here it seems like it would kind of make sense, right? Because it's just the total number. Where I start to get nervous about that is when we're looking at the school-specific data, because that might be an easier thing for somebody to trace that could actually really be inadvertently violating HIPAA and stuff,
Yeah,
right?
I would understand that.
So
I
that,
kind of
but
think
I don't know if it might be possible to add it
Yeah.
on something like this that is the entire
Yeah.
aggregate.
Yeah.
However, if it was just one across, so we just have to look at it.
Yeah.
So I do have that information. We are tracking that information, so I can clearly say, give that as an update here at the meetings, even if we feel like it's not something that we can post. But I'll talk with the nurses about that as well too, and kind of problem solve that, because I would not want to do something that then we inadvertently realize, ooh, wait a second, that was probably information that we shouldn't have posted.
Yeah. Nope, I understand. That's good news, though.
Yeah. Any other questions about the data specifically? So then, our test and stay scenario. So I did get a couple of questions, because as the close contacts are getting a little bit, you know, those numbers are getting a little bit higher, more families were impacted. And so parents, I think there were some parents who were expecting to be able to participate in the test and stay program. We've just never rolled it out. It hasn't started yet. For multiple reasons. We had a program coordinator who was working with me for like 2 weeks trying to set up that in-person. This program coordinator was working with us virtually, so was not here in town. And that person quit. They don't work for us, they work for the staffing company, but they quit today. And
kidding?
at the same time as the staffing company found one person who could come to the building to work here, and they were trying to get another person in play to come here. So I think we might have 2 people who might be available to come into the building, but they can't do any communication. So like the only thing that their staffing would allow would be for them to literally do the test and put the information in the computer. But all of the communication, which is truly the biggest part of all of this follow-up and the contact tracing, would still fall squarely on the shoulders of our nurses, which is what we can't do right now. So Chris Sanders and I, we actually talked, we were talking to Valerie, you had the question about ARPA funding, and so we had a thought whether or not we should be trying to get some ARPA funding right now to hire our own nurses here, who then we could assign to do whatever we need them to do. They could be helping us with contact tracing, they could be helping us with communication to parents, they could be helping our school nurses because they'd be working for us. They wouldn't be working as a contractor who would have limitations as to what they can do. In talking with Dan O'Donnell and Jody Ross, they actually talked about the fact that there was still some CARES Act money that was available that we could utilize right now. So I'm working with them to figure out, could we use some of that money that's still available through December to potentially hire our own nurse, whether it's a registered nurse or an LPN, to help support our needs, knowing then that we would need that through the school year. So then we would need to, before December, we would have to have a plan in place to figure out how the spring funds would be covered and if that would come out of ARPA, which we have time to do. So they were basically saying we didn't have to rush to try to squeeze something into an agenda with ARPA funds because we still have access to the CARES Act. So we're in the process of figuring out what that amount would look like and trying to get that going in to see who's available to help us locally, as opposed to these staffing organizations that are trying to find people on their own. So therefore, we have the tests, right? We've ordered tests. We have the tests. We have the space here. We just literally need people who can oversee it, because our nurses have all the kids back in the building now, right? So they have their clinics are full steam ahead. They have emergencies that are taking place in the building that they have to be addressing and dealing with. And so the idea of needing to input data, get it to the state database, then communicate that to families and answer questions of the families who are getting information, it's taking too much time for them to do it. So I don't want to start it until we have the people in place who can actually do it with fidelity.
So if there are any bus drivers / nurses out there,
That's right.
like
Yeah.
we need you. You are
That's
a
right.
hot commodity.
Right.
I've also seen pleas for lunch.
Oh, yeah, lunch aides.
Staff.
Lunch staff
substitutes.
too, yeah.
We'll
take
find a
anyone.
spot for anyone who's
That's right.
is willing.
Right.
So
Does it- oh, sorry.
questions that may come up, I guess, I've forgotten it now. Oh, who's handling the search for potential nurses? That's one. And then, do we have a sense of timeline on the CARES Act money and process for that?
So the CARES Act, the search for nurses internally will be us. Central office will be trying to do that. Once we know that we have the specific funds, then we'll move forward with trying to find somebody, I think, in our locality, as opposed to if they have somebody, and if this staffing company still has these 2 people who can come in the morning for 2 hours and help with the test, by all means, I'll still utilize their support, because that's being paid for by the state. We're not paying for it. It's just that then it's not helping us with the actual communication of anything. So I want to make sure that we have our people dedicated to be able to communicate with them, so that we can actually make all of this happen. And so, at the timeline of the CARES Act, I just don't know how fast we'll get that set. I know I have to give Dan O'Donnell the information that he needs, so I'm working with him to figure out what he needs from me in order.
Do you think
to-
that'll be a select board approval, or is that
No,
under
it's not.
his?
It's
under
actually,
his
no, that's something that,
purview?
I believe that it's under Jody's
Yeah.
purview, yeah.
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 Gotcha. Great.
I have a question. So regarding like here a internal nurse, is like so for CARES Act, we can pay for December, then probably like in the spring we have other funds, but then will that become a permanent position which will actually eat into a budget?
No.
Okay.
No, so we're not looking to, we're looking as a temporary support right now, while we're still dealing with testing and COVID scenarios, not as a permanent position in adding to our number of nurses.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that nursing position have to be a nurse? If we have these contractors coming in who are doing the administration of the testing, And then you're saying that that support person we need to put in place is kind of more administrative by the sounds of it?
Well, I don't know, because I do feel like they can be support in our buildings to our nurses, right? So I do feel like they have to have, they do need to either be an RN or an LPN so that they can be in terms of, I mean, technically, if we're just finding somebody to help with the communication piece, then no, not necessarily. Just like originally, they were telling me that we only had people who needed to observe the testing, so that the person, that's what the company was telling me, that it didn't have to be a nurse, but that's because they were trying to move everybody towards the pooled testing. The test and stay has to be administered by, the individual can't do it. That it has to be, a medical individual to do the test and stay by next now test.
But they're medical people that that are the contractors would be coming from, is it
they're-
CIC or?
Does it have to be
Yes.
CIC? Could it be one of our own administering test and stay tests?
Oh,
Does it have to
we
be-
could, yeah, we could have
okay,
them
just
do it
wanted
as
to
well.
So
too, but-
if we had a nurse, she could administer.
Yeah, she could.
Very presumptuous of me to say she, apologies. If we had a nurse, they could.
That individual could do it, yeah, yeah.
Okay, how long can it take? I'm very aware we're 4 weeks in, and I know there are other towns up and running, in the surrounding areas. So it just feels like this has the potential to still take a few more weeks to really get up and running.
Right.
And the whole point of this was to avoid having kids missing school. I know for a fact there's already one kid at home tonight who's off for the rest of the week because they don't have the test and stay option.
Right.
So I'm just curious as to.
I can't answer that.
Yeah.
Because I just don't, I wanted it to happen 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Right? I wanted it to happen when they told us that they were gonna provide us the support that they haven't provided us. So,
Okay.
I can't speak to how it's working in some other towns. I have talked to other superintendents who were incredibly frustrated by the lack of support that they've been getting from the company, the contractor, and I know that's a frustration throughout the state. So I feel like it just depends on what their infrastructure was like in the first place and what they've been able to absorb versus what others can't. But we are making it a priority because we want that to happen. It's still really important for everybody to understand that it seems like it's an option for everybody, but it's not, right? Because vaccinated individuals don't test and stay. Anyone who's symptomatic doesn't test and stay, right? And it has to be somebody who is a close contact in a school. That part, our numbers are kind of going up, so there are people who definitely would be able to benefit from it right now, but it's also not the large number that we might have thought, but I want to be able to move on it as fast as we can.
And they're not able to administer, because it's the Buy Next Now test,
Yeah.
which you can buy in Walgreens or CVS. There's any option for students to be able to administer it themselves to improve the results, or?
No, the only piece of it is the e-med part that they can do over the weekend for them to participate in extracurricular activities like sports or some type of an event. The school will be able to give them a specific test, which is different, I believe, than the one that they're actually using in school, and those have to be observed and then recorded and uploaded. So that's.
Okay.
But that's only specifically for the weekend purposes to participate in an athletic event or some type of extracurricular activity like a show or a club meeting or something like that.
Okay.
Laura?
It's sad to say, but true. It is not at all a surprise to me that the state has overpromised and underdelivered in their support for this testing protocol. That was a concern last year with the testing program that rolled out. It rolls out, it sounds all shiny and perfect, and it's going to be easy, and the reality of it is it's not easy. It's a huge burden to administer these testing programs. So while in theory I'm very supportive of testing programs, and I'm very supportive of this one, I can totally understand why our nursing staff does not currently have the bandwidth to administer it. And anything we can do to increase that bandwidth and to have, a nurse that is not just a part of this CIC group that has very limited tasks that they can assist with, but has that broader flexibility to help our capacity across the system, I think is fantastic. And if we're kind of cobbling that together with CARES and ARPA, and perhaps if that's a temporary contracted position, that person might become part of our school community over the long term. You know, positions always open up, and maybe that becomes a future nurse at one of our schools for the long term. So I think if there's anything we can do to fund that in the short term, and welcome applications from the community to please help in this situation, fully supportive, and please let us know if there's anything we can do to advocate for that.
Well, one of the things too is that, I mean, we do have really solid support from our substitute nurses, right? We don't have a very large list, but the ones who do help us out are great. And if they're able to help with some of this, now granted, they might not have the time, right? Depending on what their other commitments are as well too. But that's another thing that helps. So for us locally, I'm a little bit more optimistic that we might have options for the help if we have the finances to really, you know, pay people for the work that they're doing. I'm hopeful, but we'll see. Yeah.
The other thing I'd add was, you know, to Catherine's question of could this be done by someone who isn't necessarily a nurse or has medical training, based on the feedback from what we heard from our nurses in terms of when you make a phone call to a family about a close contact, it very quickly becomes a counseling session.
They have a lot of questions about the virus and a lot
right.
of questions about symptoms and a lot of questions about things that.
I would think
Yeah.
it is absolutely, you know, if we're supporting, you know, mental health and wellness of students
Agreed.
and their families who are getting these phone calls, if that phone call can be done by a medical professional, that is worth the extra funding on our part to make sure that it's a medical professional who's making that phone call, because those conversations sound like they're not easy ones.
And I agree,
Yeah.
Gloria. My only thing is that the whole point of this is to have the kids in the building. You know, if you have a case test positive, you can refer them to their pediatrician. You know, there's other ways around it. I mean, the main aim was to allow us to get back into the buildings, to let us, you know, interact like as much as close to normal as possible. And so, you know, that my biggest concern is that we don't have that happening at all. You know, granted, in the grand scheme of things, it would be great to have this, you know, up and running, completely functional testing option. But when we don't even have any sort of option to have the kids in their classroom is my bigger concern. You know, I mean, I'm looking at the numbers here. We've 22 school-related close contacts. I mean, do the current nurses have any capacity? Because if there is relatively low, I mean, that's across the whole district, is there any capacity to stopgap it for a week or two and let those school nurses do the tests and stays for each school's close contacts while we get the district up and running in the
was
in the
actually
process?
our original thinking with
Yeah.
the nurses, and thinking about logistically, it's a quick swab. The students would be sitting there anyway. If well, that would be more if they were symptomatic testing. But when we had an outstanding meeting with the nurses last week that Dr. Chu pulled together, and quite honestly, our mindset and understanding that they're overstretched going in was very different than coming out. When we left that meeting, we acknowledged that there's absolutely no way we can put this on them. Okay. So these really great strategies that we could use to keep kids in school were contingent upon getting the additional staff. With our eye on exactly what you're saying, could they absorb it? And hearing the many different stories and the multiple steps for each case that have to be taken, and even such limited access to the database throughout the town, we have people saying, oh, this family member, this parent is on the positive list, but their kids are here. Why aren't their kids quarantined if mom is at home? And then they have to do some additional and detective work to try to get to the bottom of that, just to prevent if there's a possible situation where there's somebody who is a close contact and could be carrying, could be in our schools. So I would say prior to that meeting, I feel like the answer could be, well, we can explore it and ask again. And after that meeting, it is just alarming how overstretched they are.
Okay. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think it's good to hear.
But I also think your point, which is whatever it takes to get this up and running as soon as possible, in a functional way, in a reasonable way, I'm guessing this committee would be very supportive of, and anything we can do to help. Yeah.
And some of it was just even our going, the tipping point of going from, okay, someone said they're gonna support it, they're gonna support it, they're gonna support it, they're gonna give us the people, they're gonna give us the people, so we're ready, once you're ready, okay, you think it might be next day, you think it might be next day, and then finally, then this person quits, and then they get this, that's where I'm like, okay, now we just wanna say, okay, can we hire our own people? Do we have the funds to do that, to then just figure out that we can then meet all the needs that we have, and that's what we're now gonna fast track and see what we can do.
By the signs of it, though, then we would have always needed to hire our own person if they were never going to do any of the administrative.
That is a piece that I've been arguing with them about, because I was told that they were going to do it, and then when they hired a program coordinator, that person went to training that then was told they weren't going to, so it did get a little bit contentious between me and individuals telling me that they weren't gonna do what I was told that they were gonna do. And then they were pointing me to different FAQs that said different things, and so so that was a little bit of it, to be frank.
Which points to Gloria's whole point.
Right.
Overpromised,
I'd
underdelivered.
love to
I'm not
move on.
shocked.
I'd love to move on to probably
Yeah.
the bigger piece of information is the fact that the commissioner did release new information today. And that information was first that he's extending the mask mandate to November 1st across the state. We know that our local Board of Health voted to start an indoor mask mandate starting October 1st in Westford. And the other piece that the commissioner rolled out was an off-ramp instead of October 1st, but being October 15th for districts who can validate their vaccination status. Now, what we're being asked to do is it is per school. So what I'll have to do is we'll start figuring out exactly how we can do this. It says that one of the things we can do is just ask people to sign an attestation form that then we can seek to verify, but we don't actually have to collect every single image of a vaccination card in order to do it. It allows for that. That's one of the things that it said that I can collect. It is per school. It needs to be 80% of the student and staff that are in that school. It doesn't include parent volunteers or like central office who might be going in. It's just the people who are housed in that building for that school. If on October 15th we felt like we were ready to go in that direction. The medical advisors are advising me that we not move in that direction yet, that it's still too soon to be moving in that direction, but what I plan to do is at least start collecting the information now that they've told us what we need to do.
Yep.
The other part is that my understanding, I know you I think listened in on the Board of Health meeting, but the Board of Health mandate does cover the schools. I did have a parent reach out to me today saying that they were told by the Board of Health that on the 15th we could make our own decision, but I don't believe that that's the language that they created, so that might need to be a change for them if that's something we need to do. But I do want to clearly say at this moment in time, I'm going to start collecting the information, but the advice that I'm getting and the counsel that I'm hearing from our consulting physicians and even the Board of Health is that we shouldn't be making that move yet. So we'll see what we end up deciding to do for the 15th, but that's where we're at. Any questions about the two different things? What? There's questions?
Well, I think it's interesting. I'll be really curious to see how, like, collecting the attestation forms, or people can send in photos or whatever of their cards, like how quickly people respond to that. I actually think people are going to be pretty eager to be like, even if we're not ready to make that decision, we want to be ready.
Right.
We're hearing people have it, so we have that option, but I think I'm hearing what you're saying from medical professionals. Not yet, the numbers are still high. But I will also say, you know, there's optimism that the numbers look like they're declining
Yep.
nationwide,
Yep.
which hopefully is a sign that the Delta variant is somehow running its course sometime. And it sounds like 5 vaccines for 5 to 11-year-olds could be any day now from Pfizer. So that's positive news too. But yeah, cautious, hopeful but cautious.
Yep.
Thanks. Gloria?
I just had 2 points. One, it's worth pointing out that, yet again, the state has devised a mechanism which sounds simple, but is not. So collecting this
Yeah.
data is
Yeah.
no small feat, and of course, you know, someone has to find the bandwidth to do that. So again, I think it's just bears repeating that what the state makes sound so simple in a document that people read on DESI, someone has to implement that, and that's not an easy thing to do on top of everything else they're already doing. So that leads to kind of the next point, that I think it is important to set expectations that if we are starting to collect this info, that just because we are collecting the information does not mean that the mask mandate will magically evaporate on XYZ date, whether it's October 15th or November 1. We still have, we have the DESI requirement, we have the advice from our local physicians, we have the mandate from our own local Board of Health. All of these are factors that are going to play in, and I wouldn't want people to have the expectation, we had a discussion earlier about misinformation and how it spreads like wildfire, that once we hit the magic 80%, that everybody can just rip their masks off the next day. It will be a more complicated, layered discussion that involves our consulting physicians, our nurses, and the Board of Health and our local conditions at the time. But absolutely, as long as everyone understands that, please collect the info. Let's get
the other piece that I still think is slightly confusing, that I'm gonna dive deeper into to see if it reads what it looks like. But when it talks again about this by school basis, then when I read this and it says 80% of the students and staff, then that also means, whereas originally we thought if the district met the threshold, then vaccinated individuals throughout the district would have the ability to not wear the mask. But this is clearly saying that it's school by school, which means that our faculty members who might be vaccinated working in an elementary school where the students will not meet an 80% threshold would still be wearing a mask, whereas if that threshold was met at the academy, all vaccinated individual students and or staff would not have to wear masks, which is an interesting, that's an interesting scenario that they've created.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But understandable as well, considering the elementary aren't vaccinated.
Yeah.
So you can understand why that would happen.
So some of the school they share staff. So will that staff be counted twice? Like for example, we share the music staff between the two middle schools.
They
or
probably
some-
should be
Yeah.
counted twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'd be counted for each building.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But to Gloria's point too, we should think about, I mean, I would say you might want to think about, if you feel like communicate, like how you want to communicate,
Right.
whether we should post something somewhere sooner rather than later, because
And I am
people are
saying
starting
it here clearly on camera too, so I did say that
This is
quite
true.
emphatically
This
from
is
the
true.
beginning, that I'm gonna start collecting the information even though we're not doing those things.
I mean, we have one
However,
email already saying,
we know that people aren't always watching
right.
this meeting.
We have one email already that says, can't wait for the 15th, right? We already have one that
We do have that.
says, so cool, can't
We
wait
do
for
have
the
that.
15th in the mat. So
We do.
we'll have to see how many more, as word gets round
Right.
in the community that like there's some change and people, we know how word spreads sometimes inaccurately and people think that the 15th
Yep.
is the day that the masks come off, and that will not be the case.
I think that's it for the COVID update, right?
Yeah, thank you. Pat, that means it's Pat's, it's financial updates with Pat, thank you.
Hi everyone. How are you?
Hi, good.
So first of all, from a staffing point of view, I'm happy to report that today is day 6 of being fully staffed.
Oh,
Yes, yes. We have a little bit of a learning curve going on, but we're happy to be where we are. This is probably the last time that I'll be up here reporting on 3 different fiscal years. So, hope it's September.
Right.
So the first thing was, I think there had been a request to ask for the breakdown. If you remember, we finished the year with $863,000 remaining balance. And so it was asked to be broken down categorically. So the sum of all of those categories is exactly the amount that we reported on, that I reported on at the last meeting. And then an end of year balances for grants and revolving funds and reserve accounts have also been provided. There were some questions, and so I can understand why there was some confusion. So sometimes folks looked at, let's say, FY21 activity, and for something that didn't occur, so for instance, the full-day kindergarten, and they saw a revenue and they saw an expense. But if you think about it, what happened was parents paid in the spring of 20. So the revenue was in FY20. And there would be no way for you to delineate that money from all of the revenue in FY20. So people are paying their FY20 money and people are paying their first payment for FY21. Then in FY21, there was an expense to pay people back. Okay, so there was some confusion about, hey, did we not give everybody their money back? That's not the case. Okay, the case was it crossed different fiscal years. So I hope that helps a little bit. And so before I move on, are there any other questions for FY21?
It probably is another, thank you for the explanation on the kindergarten and preschool line items. This is probably something similar, but the school bus transportation line item jumped out at me. Could you
Right.
speak to
So the revenue is what the revenue was, and then although the budget for FY21 was dependent on some revenues from the bus account, they weren't used.
Okay.
So it was paid out of the general fund.
Okay, so 5,000 is all we ended up needing from our school bus transportation. Thank you.
If we're done with FY21, there are no votes required for FY21, so,
I had one more question,
Sure.
just on a different sheet, sorry. The special revenue funds, which is, I'm sorry, are they all labeled the same? Okay. The special ed reserve fund, which my understanding of it is that in the past, I think there was like a closeout and we've added money to that with a specific vote. But these were showing, that line item is showing activity for FY20 and FY21. My memory is hazy of last year, but I don't remember any votes. Is there another mechanism that puts money into that line item that I'm forgetting?
So I did look for minutes, and I could not find any record of any kind of vote by the school committee on that. I mean, obviously, it's clear I wasn't here, right? But
Sure.
I did try to go read the minutes, and Dr. Chu and Dr. Cleary and I did too. So first of all, I did some research, and we all did some research. We discussed it. And it looks like it's clear activity is required to establish the reserve account in the first place. They actually call it a stability fund. They don't call it a reserve account
Okay.
for whatever. So if it's clear that there has to be a vote to establish it. There also has to be a vote by both the school committee and the select board to withdraw from it.
Right.
It's not clear whether there has to be a vote to deposit to it.
Okay.
And
You mean the special education stability fund? Every year, if there is a deposit, we vote it. So I don't remember we voted for last year.
So I guess whether or that's a great conversation for us to have, but what I'm still wondering is what money is showing up there. Do you know what I
so
mean?
I'd have to go back and do a
Okay,
deep
yeah,
dive
sure,
since I wasn't,
sure.
yeah, I don't know.
But I think to that point that you might want to shed some history on it.
I mean, yeah, my understanding is exactly what Ming Chen's was, is that it has been our practice is to vote that money in, and it was a vote of the school committee to vote money into that fund, and it is a vote of both the school committee and the select board to take money out.
We never took any money out.
Right, and we haven't, but the the point of that fund, for anybody watching at home that's wondering what we're discussing, is the point of that fund is really to help stabilize, because certain, high dollar tuitions or unexpected move-ins can really cause unanticipated fluctuation in our special education tuition expenditures. So that fund is supposed to be kind of a hedge against unexpected expenses. So it was absolutely our goal to fund that account. At the end of last year, again, I also do not recall us taking a vote to putting money into it, but there was also kind of there was obviously a complex transition in play with a departing finance director, an interim finance director, and our new finance director, a departing superintendent, and an incoming superintendent. Obviously, I believe if that vote had come to the school committee and said that there is X number of dollars remaining that will be returned to the town, let's put money into that fund, I think that would have been universally supported. If we've missed that procedural step, I don't see a reason why we couldn't go back and retroactively cure that, and just place a vote on the next agenda, and cure that step. If that vote never took place, and that discussion should have happened, but there is, money that was put in that account over the summer when we weren't meeting. If something got lost in translation, I think the correct thing for us to do as a committee is to perhaps just acknowledge that and take a retroactive vote to cure that oversight. I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. I'm not suggesting we do it tonight because it's not on our agenda, but if anyone feels that we need to check with the town on that, or check with council to make sure that that's the appropriate step, but that would be my suggestion.
Can I just ask a clarifying question there? Because I was following you until you said this summer, right? So nothing has gone into this summer. So that's our challenge with it right now, is that it isn't something that has taken place since July 1 or since July, I can't remember the actual date when you started. So,
I started July 26th. I don't even think Jeannie did, and Jeannie
right.
started.
So it is something, it's not something that would, so the question that we had with the,
It just shows up.
So it's
Right.
last fiscal year.
Yeah.
So it was fiscal year FY '21, but it could have been, it was, it probably was prior to March, my
but we
guess.
haven't
Prior
put
to
anything,
March?
we haven't
Well,
moved
Jean was here in
anything.
March.
So is it possible that it's a vote that we took in spring of FY '20 and
That's what we
then
can't
the-
find. We reviewed
remember.
the minutes that we were able to look at. I mean, that
Yeah.
might be something, honestly, if it's something that any one of you might have a little bit more connection as to
Oh.
what meeting it might be, you might have better success.
What did we put in at the end of FY '20?
FY20, I remember now was
FY
a vote.
'20, we put in
FY
100.
'20?
FY20, I remember there was a vote to deposit some money into that fund.
As part of all the conversation around the budget, reallocating monies. Do you remember the sum total? Is it possible that it was split up?
111,000. So the FY '20, the
Right.
deposit was 111,000.
But that's not the number I remember. I'm wondering if it was split over.
Over
Some of it
two
was put
fiscal
in
years.
FY '20 and some was put in FY '21. Because that
I
total would be
wonder.
160. Does that sound familiar? I don't know.
That's,
Well, I think we need to actually do some research.
I think we do too.
yeah. Yeah,
So- We
can figure that out.
yeah, I can definitely go back and take a look at minutes, and we can try and detective it out. Maybe there is no need for a cure on anything, because maybe we just need to parse it out as to what vote might have gotten tied to which fiscal year.
Right.
So,
And
I do
think it-
appreciate what you said, though,
Yeah.
too, about the idea that we do know that, like, we would figure out what it was, and if something was missed, we can correct that. I just
Yep.
know that the money, that this hasn't happened this summer. It
Right.
hasn't happened.
Right.
It happened beforehand.
And I just want to say, as a member of the finance subcommittee, and maybe with the policy subcommittee, maybe we can talk about whether this does need to be kind of nailed down in black and white in a documented, if we do it.
You mean-
Just to make any future transitions, not gonna, the
Well, Pat and I did learn a lot about it today. Just even reading up on all the
We learned that
law
Google doesn't work if you call it a reserve fund.
And I do
That's
think it requires a
important.
vote of this committee to allocate funds to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
but I think
didn't come up on the
What they,
searches.
what they talked about, what they talked about from DESI, from the resources that we had at DESI, was that it referenced budgeting it, like you can make decisions to move something as part of your budget, and so in theory that you would have, it would be voted on as you were voting on the budget, because you're making decisions to move something at that moment in time. It didn't talk about as a standalone vote needing to do it, but so we didn't dive deeper into what that meant, but that.
But at the state level, stabilization funds have their own designation, and so I
Right.
was just poking and found like the whatever, when
Yeah.
they first, and it says majority vote to put money in, 2/3 vote to take money out. And it's a weird one too, because we have to do a joint vote with the select board, and I don't know why that necessarily is.
When we established it at a local level, and I think this is where it is already in black and white,
Oh, okay.
is it was a town meeting article. To establish the
Yes.
fund, it had to be
Yes.
established. So the language, I believe, if I'm remembering correct, is the language of that warrant article specifies that we vote in and both groups vote out.
Okay.
So that may be an additional local.
Oh, so the warrant language, you think said it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's an
Right, yeah.
additional, so I can understand it may not be required at the state
Got it.
level, but our local charge,
Okay.
when we established the fund, that's the place that we'd also need to check. So, I'll check the town meeting language from when it was established, because that should be in black and white, and perhaps we should take that language and put it into policy, so it is part of our policy on our website.
And I was going to ask a clarifying question for you, Valerie. Is that what you meant, is just clarify the mechanism by which, versus like a particular time? I mean, we sort of, I think we're thinking at the end of each fiscal year, we might look at putting money in there.
Sure.
I mean, that's a timeline question, or.
I mean, I think we can talk about it as a
Yeah.
subcommittee too, but I lean towards putting some boundaries or best practice ideas around some of these revolving funds, and about like what kind of balance we intend to carry, that kind of thing. So that would all play into that conversation in my mind.
Yep.
And I mean, I don't mean to ask you to look for like receipts on these, but I guess part of the research would just be,
Where did that
Yeah, right.
$49,000 come from? Yeah.
yeah,
Let me see what I can come up with.
And I would just point out, just for people, I mean, the purpose of this stabilization fund, it's in the name, is for stability. And we've seen how special education costs can fluctuate wildly, unpredictably year to year. And this acts like a big buffer, a big filter that lets us more accurately plan, but also adapt and respond to those changing costs. So like having that, and Courtney, I don't know if you have, you started to comment, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. But one question I'd have is, what's a good size for that? It'd be nice that it gets to a size where we are almost impervious to those fluctuations year to year. That, as long as we don't have 3 bad years in a row, like we can kind of like predict closely to what we're gonna spend on those costs.
Yeah, that would be great if we could get closer to predicting that number, but it can fluctuate. And several years ago, it was a very, very high number. It was around $700,000, and I remember that was really one of the driving forces behind establishing this stability fund. To Valerie's question, how does some of that money go in there? There are times, unique situations, in which we are taking in money from the special education department because we try to partner with our community neighbors as much as possible. So in some cases, if there is a program that we offer that one of our neighboring communities do not, they might come in and pay us tuition. If they do that, we run it through our circuit breaker chart as required by Department of Education. So we're not just saying, hey, it's a $50,000 program. It's actually what it is, what the state would kind of equate for money. It does not happen often. For the past 3 years, that we have had a student from a neighboring community come into our district. Several years ago, we sent a student to the North Middlesex Regional School District for some of the programs that they had. So that's one of the sources that it might come in. And then there are some other unique situations where you know, with special education, it's sometimes you're in a settlement agreement. And so if there is any kind of a balance, then I do believe that that's where the decision was previous to deposit that money there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Courtney. So seeing no other questions, we'll move on to FY22, the current year. So there had been a question about walking through the process for a budget transfer. So basically the bottom line is that, so right now, at month's end, the business office reviews the available balance. The goal is to have each school manage its own lines, but we're not there yet. We haven't had the process established enough yet. But the bottom line is if a line is overdrawn, you look at the other lines on which there are available balances, you project future spending because you don't want to transfer money out to March, have to transfer it back in again, although that does happen sometimes. But you just identify the lines that need money. The chart that you see asking for approval of the budget transfers just categorizes, it brings them all up to the DESI categories rather than providing you with a line-by-line transfer list, which would probably not be all that helpful anyway. And then the bottom line is, of course, from and to have to balance. It's not really all that complicated. The other thing is that this month we erroneously triggered the transfers on 9/1, so when we ran the reports for August, they were still negative. And we realized that we couldn't run them for 9/1. So moving forward, the transfers for September will occur on 9/30, so that when we run the September reports, they should look clean. We're going to let tuition stay negative because once Grant 240 is approved, we're going to move some tuitions over there. So it doesn't make any sense to move them out and move money in and then move, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. But other than that, we're going to try to keep ahead of this, and we're going to try to get the schools have a more active management in the process. I feel the schools have really been engaged with the whole process. They're not doing the transfers yet, but they're much more engaged in correct charge codes, and I'm getting a lot of questions, and I think it's going really well. So I'd like to thank them all. So we would need a vote for the budget transfers.
Motion to approve July and August 2021 budget transfers.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, that's 6, that's unanimous.
On the non-quarterly basis, I'll just be providing you with the monthly status. It's just a report that I run in a link. And then at the end of, so at the October meeting, at the end of October meeting, I'll provide with you with sort of an interim status of the what we just discussed now with the revolving funds and the grants and all that sort of stuff. But for now, it's just the general fund. And then the last thing for FY22 is the student activity funds. So this is a yearly approval of maximums, as well as, I don't really think we need board committee approval to consolidate accounts within the student activity, but I couldn't find a definitive answer. So since we were talking about student activities anyway, I just thought I would throw that on here. And then the audit, which I've been in contact with the town. They have the capacity. It's not really an onerous task because, as you can see, we only need them to do it every second, third year for more than 25,000. I explained here what they're doing. So that would be the recommendation. This recommendation mirrors past year's recommendations.
You want 3 votes?
Yeah, we'll do 3 separate votes for this.
Motion to approve the maximum balance for student activity checking accounts in Pat's memo. Miss anything there?
And I'm sorry, you made the motion. I will second it, but then can I
Okay,
ask
yeah,
you a question?
questions, discussion.
I'm trying to remember, but I believe those maximum balances are unchanged from what we've had it.
They're unchanged. I do have to tell you that we're way above them. So we have to do some cleanup in the student activity accounts,
Right.
but we have to prioritize the work and it's not bleeding. So,
Yep.
yeah, but we will get to that.
And just for clarification, these are per school,
They are.
and within those, there are different activities that might have, I don't know how you term, like a sub-account or a sub-ledger.
Right. So for instance, where you see that we're closing out the H2O, that it's kind of upcycle, it's all different things like that.
And does the audit look at those individual, like, sub-accounts, or does it just look at the overall?
Well, it must to a point because it was the auditor who that requested that the accounts be closed.
Right, there you go. I'm
So
sure,
I-
I'm sure it does. Okay.
Yes.
So we have a motion and a second to approve these limits for the student activity accounts. Any other questions or comments? All right, all in favor? That's 6-0 unanimous.
Motion to approve the closure of the H2O and upcycle accounts within Blanchard Middle School student activity account.
Second.
Sorry. And Catherine with the second. Any questions or discussion? Okay, I'll call for them. Oh, do you have a question?
Nope.
Oh, you're
Sorry.
voting. Okay, all in favor? 6-0 unanimous.
Motion to approve Town of Westford accounting and finance staff to be designated as the internal auditors for the Westford Public Schools student activity accounts.
Second.
That's Gloria for the second. Questions, discussion? Okay, all in favor? 6-0 unanimous.
Okay, moving on to FY '23, the only changes on this budget calendar, proposed budget calendar, is the integration of the dates of meeting with the town. And there had been a question about, is this earlier? It was more that last year was late. And these dates align with the historical budget that's been used here for the budget calendar.
Not a question, but a discussion that we should take up in finance subcommittee and then maybe as a full committee or with Dr. Chu is that according to that, do you mind if I look for a second?
Yeah.
There's, I think I looked at our committee meeting schedule and there's like one meeting, like superintendent budget would be presented, then one meeting, and then a budget vote would be the third meeting. So that timeline is slightly concerning to me. Maybe your budget will be
Maybe it
a
won't
home
be a
run
concern, right?
And it won't,
Right?
won't matter, but we should probably
Pay attention.
think about that
Yeah.
as it gets closer.
I don't.
We've
think-
had to add meetings
Sure.
every year.
Yeah.
Since I don't know when, so we can expect that there will be potentially additional budget meetings interspersed in there as
Yeah.
well.
Even before COVID, though, I remember watching budget meetings into February. So
Yeah,
the-
yeah, definitely. It's in
The
around
the
like.
vote does feel early to me. I hear I know last year kind of colored our experience, but that does still feel early even for a normal year, so. I
This
don't
is
know.
just recommendation. We can always add and remove.
Well, no,
meetings.
you created that list with the town, right?
So,
Right.
but to be honest with you, it's predicated on past budget calendars.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
When we looked at it, did I think Dr. Cleary had looked to see
The 2019
when
year.
our last couple of votes took place, and it seemed to be around the same time.
Mid to late January.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if like when it's one of those things, like when we actually look at the dates,
Mhm.
it just doesn't feel like that's when it was taking place?
Could be.
And-
Or were there discussions that were taking place based on, maybe were there ever times when there were discussions that took place because of the meetings with the FinCom and the Select Board? I'm not sure.
Okay.
I feel it's more like late January, early February-ish for the last couple of years.
Well, for FY '19, which means it was 2018 at the time, the school committee voted on January 8th, 2018, and we presented to the three boards on January 24th, 2018.
Wow.
Then, as we developed the FY '20 budget, school committee voted on January 17th, 2019, and we presented to Select Board and FinCom on January 24th, 2019.
So we're really
And
That was
similar.
the,
That's the one with Latin and everything
right.
too.
I remember
No,
that.
it was the year prior.
This was
20,
FY20 is Latin, was the Latin
February
year.
2020 was Latin.
Yeah, I can't believe we
Right,
were done
so-
on the 17th.
Yep.
It felt like, felt like it went on for
Yes,
months.
so
Interesting.
these are based
It's
on.
just that
the-
one meeting, it literally went on.
Yeah.
Time
Probably
stopped.
It started in December and it was January when they ended the meeting.
But also remember that we had additional meetings that were segmented into the hot topics. So there was a Latin night.
I
there
think
was
that's right.
the-
But they were
But
all
the-
on the 17th is the part that
Right.
surprised me, yeah. But you're right, but
Okay.
yeah, you're absolutely right. We had probably 5 meetings
Mhm.
starting in December, because we even,
Right.
yeah,
So it's a goal, it's a goal.
It's a-
Yes.
we can do it.
Yeah, we can do this.
The town was very pleased to see that the committee would vote prior to going to the town. They were
Okay.
pleased with that, and those were the dates of our meeting anyway, so.
And I enjoyed that trip down memory lane just now.
That's right.
I did not.
Are we good?
We're good.
We're good.
Thank you, everyone.
Pat, so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you, students.
So,
Good night, guys. Thanks so
Good night,
much.
good night. Thank you, thank
Have a
you.
great week.
Good night.
So if I can just say briefly before Dr. Cleary dives into this really quick kind of presentation, it's weird because you have things in the packets, you can see it ahead of time, and it totally feels like a spoiler alert, right? Like people know where the recommendation is going. So that's why I just want to say that when we looked at the data specifically, and when it started formulating into an idea for a specific recommendation, it was a very exciting war room that I walked into, because I was in another meeting and Pat and Carrie and Courtney had started looking at potential numbers to see if it would be possible over a course of years to do something. So if somebody doesn't know what I'm talking about and they haven't read it yet, we'll at least still leave them. And it was so nice. It was when we talk about strategic improvement, when we talk about teaching and learning, when we talk about all of these things, it was so exciting because that's exactly why we're doing this work. And so I just wanted to say that it was just a really invigorating conversation for the four of us, where so far our time together has been, getting to know each other and figuring out, okay, poor Pat's trying to close all these things out that she hasn't actually been a part of. And this was our first real let's look forward conversation. And so I just wanted to share. It was the energy when I walked into the room was really exciting, and they were, and then I didn't actually squelch it, so that was important. Yeah. All right, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So as you had heard from previous meetings, we have this ESSER 3 fund. Or allocation
I'm sorry,
that's available to us.
I just stomped on you. I'm so sorry. I was trying to do that for people at home, but that screws you up. So.
Okay.
I am so sorry.
Nice one, Chris.
I was reading the big screen, and then suddenly I said, "Oh."
There we go.
So
I forgot that I would be doing that to you too.
So Zoom attendees, do you want to announce that Zoom attendees might want to watch on?
Yeah. So for the two of you still watching on Zoom, or the two of you that are still logged in, I don't know if you're still watching. If you flip over to WestfordCAT, you'll be able to see this, or if you look in the packet, you can follow along with the ESSER 3 grant presentation in there. Thank you.
All right, so ESSER 3 is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, and it's part of the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. And so just kind of the overview of our ESSER 3 allocations here in Westford. We have $587,730 available to us. We have to submit a application by October 4th as to how we intend to use those funds. And the funds have to be spent by September 30th, 2024. So we have multiple years to spread these funds out if need be. But our purpose tonight is to share with you the information that we received from stakeholders, and then to provide you with what our recommendation is to apply for the grant when we're applying for the grant on October 4th. Now, the information that we have, particularly around our recommendation, is kind of a big deal here in Westford, and we want you to know that there's nothing really expected of you this evening, and it's really just to, I guess, endorse our application for October 4th, knowing that once we take a deeper dive with you through the process of how we will roll out our recommendation, if there's something that either doesn't make sense, doesn't feel right, or other barriers that we're not even seeing, we can go in and amend that application later on if we have to come back to the drawing board to revisit how we use these funds. So tonight is non-committal, so not to worry about an expectation of any sort of vote. So the stakeholder input, we were reaching out to many different stakeholders, which this was one of the requirements for gathering information around how to use these funds. We reached out to Westford staff, to families, to students, middle and high school, to elected boards, so hopefully all of you got it and were able to participate, town employees, and citizens at large, and the town manager included the link in her newsletter, and it was placed on the town website as well. And you can see there from the bar graph, we had the highest level of participation from parents, or guardians, which is what we would assume. Then students, we were pleased that so many students wanted to share their thoughts as well. Also, Westford Public Schools staff, community members, and then others. There was an option for others, so others placed their own title in, and you can see that's reflected on the list below. So,
One.
Kid.
one kid. Right.
One for everything.
Appreciate that. Now, if you took the survey, you may remember that there were 8 available options, and these categories were categories to understand, to help us understand what is the priority here in Westford. These categories are based on the ESSER 3 and their guidelines, so they weren't just made up by us. And we also acknowledge, and it was a little wonky sending out the survey, knowing that there are lots of people who may have priorities in a certain area, but don't necessarily know what we already have going. So we had to kind of reflect on that too. But this slide here shows in order the highest priority down to the lowest priority of the 8 available options. And then the number on the right is how many people prioritize that area, either putting it as a priority or high priority. So we combined those 2 options. So the first one is providing social emotional supports for students to help with developmental milestones. The second was improving facilities. The third, addressing needs of special populations, which are low income, English language learners, special education, foster care, and others. The fourth is providing academic remediation. Fifth is increasing socialization opportunities. 6 is incorporating early childhood literacy and math supports. 7 is addressing inequities regarding opportunities that are available to students. And 8 is increasing COVID mitigation strategies. So we were actually surprised to see that that was number 8, but we also felt like people may know just how much we're doing, and that has been a big point of communication over the past couple of years and into this year as well. Then there was also an opportunity for other, so just to share with you some of the more common, although it was pretty spread out. There wasn't a clear trend, but for those who wanted to add their own thoughts, adjustment counselors, additional adjustment counselors was one. Creating a remote learning academy was another. So these aren't on the slides. I'm just speaking to the responses. Air conditioning in the buildings was a big one. Full day kindergarten was probably the most consistent fill-in answer. Teacher aides, building sidewalks around the streets near Westford Academy, and then just people concerned about air circulation or wanting to make sure that that's intact. So once we had that information, we then took those priorities and said, okay, well, let's consider some actions that we've already taken, not through ESSER 3, to see are we addressing some of these in other ways. And I think the answer in many cases was yes, and it was actually really cool to see this list as we were developing the list to see just how much we've been doing. So we've added adjustment counselors at the elementary level and then to the right of each one of these is the funding source that we used to fund these positions. So that's 2.5 adjustment counselors in order to add a 0.5 adjustment counselor at each of the elementary schools. We also added a district-wide school psychologist that was built into the, I think that should say FY22 operating budget. We also have had the interface referral service in the past. This is an outpatient mental health service and a referral line that people can call if there's some sort of mental health crisis going on. And every 2 years when we have to renew that, we often don't know where it comes from. And I know Sue Hanley has been a major advocate to make sure that that service continues. It's not just for school students and families, it's for the entire community. So oftentimes the town side has paid for that, but it's not anything that's consistently built into the budget. So this we found or felt that this would be an opportunity to use ESSER 2 funds to make sure that we have something pegged, because now more than ever we know that this service will be utilized. We also, using ESSER 2, added an extra hour for our math interventionists at the 3 to 5 schools. As you know, we offered a summer Bridge to Success program, which was tutoring for elementary students for math and literacy. We purchased assessment tools and screeners, and this is actually something that we're finding so beneficial to help us understand where students are, and it gets very granular, and it's going to be a very valuable tool for teachers as they begin their guided groups to help address some prerequisite skills that some students may not be coming to the new grade level with. Instructional software, professional development, we're using Title IIA for the charge, and Chris has been really spearheading this hard with the district, and I think what we're seeing already is the classroom conversations when we're doing walkthroughs are around building that sense of belonging with students. So the entire school year is going to be focusing their professional development on that exact topic.
Can I ask you a quick question on that last slide?
Mm-hmm.
Are any of those, and I forget the timeline of ESSER 2, like when we spend, are any of those multi-year funding? Or are they all FY22?
These are all 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some of them are FY, oh, yeah, 22.
None extend beyond FY22?
Right.
Okay.
Right. We also, using Title I funds, added an ELL teacher this year to the Miller School. Our ELL numbers are going up. They have been and continue to. We've actually hit the 100 student threshold for the first time this year, and so now we're actually going to be developing an LPAC, so similar to the CPAC, with Special Education Parent Advisory Group. This will be an English Learner Parent Advisory Group. We have after-school supports at the middle school and high school that are funded out of one of Courtney's IDA grants. We've got 3 people at the Blanchard School, 3 people at the Stony Brook, and 4 stipended people at Westford Academy that support students after school. And that started last school year, and fortunately we've got the funding to continue moving forward with that. We also have added an academic tutorial teacher at the high school using those same funds. We purchased an elementary intervention program for special education students in the area of math. So there's a specific intervention curriculum for pull-out sessions. We also have been consulting with the Brookline Center for Community Mental Health in regards to the Westford Academy Bridge program, and I know Lauren Clark and Courtney. Lauren Clark is the new coordinator for guidance at 9 through 12, and they're looking at how to optimize, along with Principal Antonelli, the use of the Bridge program. We also developed some outdoor learning spaces at Stony Brook and Westford Academy. In terms of facilities, we incorporated the air purifiers in rooms that don't have the ability to open windows. We did replace our air filters last year and continue to replace them on an ongoing basis with the MERV 13 filters. We have been testing our air quality in the facilities. We have CO2 meters, which the head custodians do routine CO2 tests in buildings, and they verify that the CO2 levels are below the ASHRAE standards. And we also had a consulting company last school year in the wintertime, FM Global, come in and do an audit with a focus on prioritizing safety in regards to COVID ventilation, and any and all corrective suggestions were made to our buildings. And then lastly, the cleaning supplies that we continue to purchase, but also innovative techniques such as that electromagnetic sprayer to make cleaning more efficient in buildings and on our transportation vehicles. So, in taking all of that into account and looking at what we've already done vis-a-vis our data and what people are feeling the priorities should be, we did come up with a recommendation. We had lots of different ideas, but what we did find was, with the amount available to us, if we were to spread it in all the buildings and to address some of these needs, then we would be spreading ourselves too thin and it wouldn't actually have an impact. So we thought of a way to really channel the funds so that it really does make a splash for the better of the students. And what we found and came up with was tuition-free full-day kindergarten starting next school year. Just click again, yep. So.
We have no audience today.
Anticlimactic, I know. So why are we considering full day K at this time? This is something that we have been talking about for quite some time. And right now we have this unique funding opportunity that's available to us. We also have students who are coming in that have had minimal preschool experience. Right now, it's the preschoolers from last year that are in 4th grade, and we don't have this free program yet, but those 3-year-olds at the time did not necessarily have the same experience as they would if we did not have a pandemic. Also, lack of robust EI, early intervention. That's for our students prior to coming to Westford Public Schools. Early intervention services were fully remote for those students throughout the entire year last year. So we know that that is not as effective in terms of intervention, and so therefore they'll be coming to us with perhaps greater needs than they would if they had the face-to-face intervention that they typically are able to offer children. We also have students who participated in our program that didn't have role model peers. Again, at the time, for the cohort we're talking about, which is next year's K, this would have been the 3-year-olds. And if you recall, last year we were not inviting tuition students into our preschool. So that was one year where there were no role models in the classroom with those students. Staff report, this is very interesting going to the buildings. Generally speaking, our students are presenting in very atypical ways. Some of the behaviors that they're exhibiting I think are indicative of not having any sort of structure, or much less structure, prior to coming into kindergarten. And then academically as well, which we will certainly address that, but many students coming into us in kindergarten can recognize their name, and most, in our case, with what we're seeing now, are not able to do that. So it is backpedaling a little bit, which our teachers are perfectly able and equipped to do, but there is a significant difference academically, but as well as the behavioral piece. And as I mentioned before, focusing our funding source could have a much greater impact than trying to address all the needs or address needs at every single school. I know that this is hard to read from way over here. So I won't read bullet by bullet, but these are all of the reasons that we believe FDK can help our students. And we know that there's been some social development and other types of development that have been delayed due to the pandemic for our young children, whether they're students of ours yet or not. But next to each one of these, you can see a number, and that's correlated to the number, the priorities, thank you, and the ranking of them. So that first one says early stages of social development have been compromised because they haven't had the same level of social experiences. Well, that has a 1 next to it because social emotional was number 1 as the highest priority. So we just
developmental milestones. Yeah, it's all
yes.
part of that same thing.
Yes, yes. So I won't read each one to you, but you can reference that for our thinking and how it relates to the data that we collected. So lastly, this is different. It looks a little bit different than how it looks in your packet. And the issue here is sustainability. So we have this one-time infusion of funds but then it goes away after we spend the money. So if we're going to do something like this, we want to make sure that it's something that's sustainable. So this is kind of the nitty-gritty into the numbers that I'm sure you're very curious about, and we won't dive into tonight. This would be its own agenda item, and I'm sure with the Finance Subcommittee, there'll be conversations about this to dive much more deeply than what I'm doing here. But what we talked about in our brainstorming sessions is a strategy that shows the use of one-time funds heavier at the beginning, and then a wean off over time to eventually absorb the entire thing in our operating budget. So these percentages may change a bit too, but for 22-23, right now we don't have anything in our operating budget, or that we assume would be in our operating budget, because we could use some of these funds. That's half of the ESSER 3 money-ish, and I mean, all of these will fluctuate, I'm sure, but 40% of what's remaining in the kindergarten revolving account, our kindergarten extended day revolving account, whatever's left in there could assist, because extended day, well, has gone away, but certainly wouldn't be coming back if we had full day K. And then some school choice offset. Then moving on to 23-24, it's the other 50% of ESSER 3, then the other 35% of kindergarten revolving, school choice offsets, and then some in our operating budget. Moving on to 24-25, we've got 25% of the kindergarten revolving account, what's remaining in there, then school choice, then operating budget, and then 25-26, you can see it's more and more in the operating budget, school choice if needed. But this is just kind of some methodology, an example of some methodology that we could use to make this sustainable over time without creating a huge funding cliff that we wouldn't actually be able to follow through with during that next budget season. And I think one of the pieces, and I won't get too deep into it, but this was a big part of our conversation, is what you don't see in here is Chapter 70 funds, because, and one might think that they should be in here because the Chapter 70 is based on enrollment. So if we can count these students instead of our 0.5 students, they would all be counted as 1.0, because even our full day can't be counted as 1.0 because the tuition part doesn't count toward our enrollment for the sake of Chapter 70. So our enrollment would go up. So one might say, well, wouldn't we get Chapter 70 increase? And because several years ago, they had legislators have determined that we will be held harmless, meaning if our enrollment declines, our Chapter 70, they aren't going to take more Chapter 70 away. So as our enrollment declined, Chapter 70 did not start declining because we're held harmless. So we have this buffer room to increase our enrollment before tripping Chapter 70 to go higher. If we have an enrollment increase and the full day kindergarten student enrollment that we know will go up does trip that, then even better. But we didn't want to rely on that during this strategy session in the case that it doesn't trip that Chapter 70 to increase at all.
Yep.
That's all we've got. We're very excited.
Yeah, not a lot.
I'm
I
ready
know.
to vote now.
Okay,
amazing
questions
work.
from the committee? I guess I'll have one. So we're encumbering future committees, and it would be helpful to know what what that number is approximately.
What the number,
So
the total cost of the full day CAS?
total cost of full day
It's approximately 800,000.
on top of what we're.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And can someone just remind me what the full day kindergarten tuition was? this past year?
$4,200.
$4,200. I mean, it's just, speaking candidly, I mean, it's amazing if we'll be able to pull this off. Like, it's just, I mean, it's a cost saving for young families. It's something that we should be doing because we want to be educating everyone in our community, irrespective of income level, things like that. So it's tremendous. I'm just thrilled, amazed, great stuff.
Will this pose a problem for the school buildings? I mean, I just think specifically of NAB. So do we think there could be other unrelated costs in terms of space or facilities? Because essentially, I think we're kind of going to end up with an extra full class, potentially, if
It
not
really
two.
depends on enrollment.
Yeah.
Right now, at NAB-NASIT,
Mhm.
that AM/PM class.
Yeah.
Really could combine
Oh, wow,
together and
okay.
still be one class.
Yeah.
Whereas at the Miller School.
Yeah.
If we combined that AM/PM together, it would be like 27.
Mm-hmm.
Too much. So it would really depend, but we did certainly take into account space.
Mhm.
And if we were to, NAB-NASIT would be the only one that would be concerning. So if we did have to take one of those halves and make it its own classroom, then we'd look at other programs to see if, but the bottom line is we feel as though there are options that wouldn't prevent us from being able to do it.
And then one wrinkle in this is like we probably will actually readjust the school boundary
Oh, yeah, exactly.
sometime.
Anyway, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. This is good news.
I feel like we're just going around. This is so
Awesome.
flippin' amazing. I mean, I'm blown away at the possibility that we might be able to do this now. I mean, I had, in my mind that this was going to be a big priority in the long-term 5-year strategic plan, that we were going to have to figure out how to do this over the next course of multiple years and wean ourselves off this tuition dependency. And if we can just halt the dependency on the tuition, but then, as you've outlined here, wean into absorbing it into the budget and to make use of these funds, I think this is an investment in our youngest learners that will pay dividends for years to come. It solves a huge equity problem in our district, and it is just so thrilling and exciting. And I know you said you weren't asking for a vote tonight, but I'd happily do so. So supportive of this and so hugely excited.
I will say the roller coaster was also quite something, right? Because when we first thought, okay, based on this survey data, based on this information, wow, wait a second, can we use this in some way to kick us into that direction? We were first clearly looking at Chapter 70 because we knew that, okay, if we go to the 0.5 to the 1, so everything that Carrie had just described, and then we learned that our numbers, our Chapter 70 is not going to change until we get our numbers back up. So it was unbelievably deflating. We thought, oh my gosh, this brilliant idea, we can't do it. And that's the energy that I walked into the room when they had started talking about, wait a second, what if we look at it this way? And that's when it was great that they didn't give up. It was great that they just looked, and I think it's a better plan because it's not relying on Chapter 70 money. And so then from there, I think all of our brainstorming and questions were, it was great. So we'll see.
On you go, Sean.
Sorry, I just saw Sean.
Sorry.
So I'm going, Sean.
Mine's quick. So this would eliminate our half-day program completely, right?
Yes.
How many families do we have now who volunteer? Like, we didn't turn anyone away from full-day kindergarten this year, right? So how many families do we have who are voluntarily entering into the half-day? It's like one class, right? Or is it two?
It's
Pretty
one
much one
class
per
at
school.
each, it's one
Each
class at
school.
each building.
Right, with the Robinson has half, and then Miller has
Morning and
AM/PM, NAB-NASIT has AM/PM.
Mm-hmm.
And some numbers are low, right?
Yes.
Some numbers are low.
So in theory, those families who were interested in the half-day program, right, that may offset some of our concerns about enrollment going up, right? Because maybe they'll seek private kindergarten, I guess.
Yeah, I think that the numbers are just so incredibly small relative to the full-day K interest.
Okay.
So right, so we've got the half-day section at Robinson, the other school, NAB-NASIT, it's, I think, 18 or 19 students total. and then 27 total at the Miller School, versus all of the, 2 of the 3 schools have 4 full day K classes, and then Miller has 3 full day K classes. So the number of full day students far outweighs the half day.
Right, okay.
Valerie?
I think you know how I feel about this. Very exciting. I mean, obviously it feels really good to have it tie into a lot of the conversations we had over the summer with the retreat about inequities. My own experience with my child going through the half-day program, and then my second child going through the full-day program. This feels like the perfect direction that the district is going in, because we keep seeming to try to meet that demand with adding a 4th classroom at 2 schools. And I also really appreciate another thread that we've talked about with the ARPA funds, is that kind of what can you do that's sort of inspirational with sort of these one-time use, I don't want to use bonus money, but, that's kind of how it feels, right? So like it just feels kind of energizing to think of something like that to be able to do with it. And I had mentioned this a little bit earlier, but for anyone that's maybe looking at this thinking that's nice, but I had this other thing that I really wanted to see happen, right? Just another plug that we do have more funding available to the town, that the schools will be creating a list for, that this isn't the only funding option we have right now. There are other inputs are still, for other avenues are still welcome. So I just want to weave that into it.
And actually, I was going to say that very point, but what might be interesting is your survey, Kerry, and some of the responses, the more kind of, direct responses, I think could be beneficial if it's possible to share that with the finance subcommittee and stuff, because I think there's a lot of very clear direction there. I think just in general, as I think with those ARPA funds, I'm obviously a big proponent of social emotional and what we can do right up through the entire school system. So I think that would be really beneficial if we could share that.
Sure, and we've got tabs for each category of response. So we've got a staff tab, a student tab, so that you're
Awesome.
able to take a look at what the trends are for each population.
That would be amazing.
And I would just like to thank Dr. Chu, because I think when we started this conversation way back, it started at we have a Tuesday morning central office meeting, and when we started talking about these funds and the survey and how we begin to ramp up to figure this out, it was kind of like all walls are down, boundaries are down, let's just put ideas out there. And so it was a really fun brainstorming session, exactly to your point, Gloria, that it wasn't this, that would be nice, but let's not talk about that. And we had some great ideas on the table. I think Courtney had mentioned, what about full day K? And the room just stopped. And looking at, when we're reviewing the data, it was just so exciting to see that there were lots of responses, that social emotional, which is exactly what this targets. But I think it was great teamwork, and it was really fun to just be forced to think outside of the box at anything and everything.
No, that's amazing.
Laura?
The one other thing that occurs to me that it's just responsible to discuss is just the historical context of this. I mean, this issue was looked at years ago, prior to, most of us being on the committee, maybe all of us being on the committee, when this issue was looked at, and at that time a different choice was made. There were different financial pressures. There was also a different demand, I think, in town. I think at that time there were a lot of parents who were still saying, we would like the option to choose half-day K. Perhaps I don't think my child is ready for a full day. Perhaps there were other concerns, I think, at that time. And I want to recognize that, one, we're in obviously in a different financial situation, this is being done in a very fiscally responsible way. And I appreciate you outlining the multi-year, responsibility phase in of this. But I think we also do need to acknowledge, for anybody who is remembering that conversation, what we have seen and what you have seen and what our principals have seen is a complete shift in the community. It has been a huge source of stress every spring when this lottery occurs and when families are crossing their fingers and hoping there's room and are there wait lists and can they get off the wait list. And it has been a huge source of stress for our K-2 principals. It's been a huge source of stress for our young families. The demand for full day K every year, we're just hoping that the numbers work out and that we can possibly meet it and make it work. And this takes us out of that cycle. So I think the community desire for full day K and to have it be equitable, to have it be tuition free, has just really shifted over this period of time. And we've seen a very dramatic community shift in that direction. And if we as a school system can honor that and provide, that's fantastic. But people should know that we really are seeing that shift in the community, and that's why this does make sense now in light of all of that shift and in light of the pandemic and the impact it's had on our youngest learners.
Educationally speaking, though, as well, Gloria, the benefits for the students, and the staff, they now have a whole day to thoroughly dive in and explore these curriculum areas, which, let's be honest, they're under time pressure when they've only got them for a half day. There's more time to engage in, social play, it's coming as an education perspective. I was unfortunately unlucky. I didn't get my girls in full day K when we moved here, and I just think the benefits for students and the teachers, in this day and age, and considering the school district that we are, I think, it's the right thing to do for students and staff. It's amazing.
I'm coming from a different age group. It
Yeah.
wasn't an option when my kids were in kindergarten.
Yeah.
It wasn't even an option at that time. And the fact that now that it, in that period of time, now it's not an option, it's not a fee-based program, it will be available for all students. That's a huge win. It's a huge win.
Are there any other towns in Massachusetts that really only have half-day kindergarten?
There are some.
I'm just interested.
Definitely there are some.
But they're in the minority at this
It's
point,
true,
so I would
definitely true.
imagine.
Yeah, it's
Huh?
definitely
I don't know. It's like when my daughter started kindergarten, there was no option for even at another lesson because they only have half day, right? The only place they have full day is through a lottery at a middle school, because the other schools they don't even offer it, right? And I really need to put my daughter into a public school like kindergarten program because I take that as a cheaper option than the private like daycare, and then not because like I want like the full day offer more education. Also, I just need to like put in a cheaper program
Oh, yeah.
at that time.
All right, any
But
other
it's
questions
not
or
available.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Any other
No,
questions or
it's
comments?
gonna move us along.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
we still have a couple more agenda items, so thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Okay, Human Resources Generalist. We previewed this at the last meeting.
We did, and so, let's see where I put it. So I had asked that if you could look at this, and I seek your vote of approval so that we can update this job description.
Yep.
One of the things that we've also, that we know that we've been able to do is we are able to provide some temporary support to our HR department too. We've actually, we have, by using some of our ESSER 2 funds, we're going to be able to hire an admin assistant as well to kind of help them right now, and then we'll look to see as we continue to assess whether that's a position that we need to then build into the budget if we feel like that is following the recommendations. But I know that was a a question in terms of we are looking for it to become a 3-person department. It's
Mhm.
a 2-person department as it is right now. We're looking, but that's coming from ESSER 2 monies right now, so it has nothing to do with this specific job description.
Great. Do I have a motion?
I have one question.
Let's do a motion in a second, and then we'll do discussion.
Motion to approve the human resource generalist job description.
Second.
All right. Sean with the second. Okay, go ahead.
I have one question with terms of employment. It puts in 12 months and also 260 days. So why do we also put in 260 days?
Because that's the number of workdays that's taking all the weekends out, so a 12-month, 260-day, like when we're looking at a calendar year, how many workdays, if you were to figure out somebody's per diem, for example,
Mhm.
you would subtract it, or you would divide it by 260. That's the actual number, so it's just a 12-month / 260. That make
Even
sense?
12 months are enough because some year it has 261 workdays. So do we
It's
have
either or, it's either or, it's kind of splitting the difference there. I see your point.
But this is only a temporary,
It is.
Yeah.
It's just for now. It's not even gonna, at this moment in time. Well, no. This is the job description we're looking at as a permanent. What I described was, we're using ESSER 2
Yes,
funds
sorry.
to provide additional clerical help to the office right now, because we talked about just the unbelievable load that they're working through with all of the different leaves and all the different, all that aspects. Yeah.
Laura.
So just to clarify the financial impact, so certainly what you described as the ESSER 2 funds for the additional person, that is being covered now by those ESSER 2 funds. We'll evaluate as time goes on and hope to see if that becomes a permanent part of the budget moving forward, but that's a step we will evaluate and vote on at that time. But for this position, since we are changing a job description, it kind of always comes up, is this an overall cost neutral within the budget? I know there's been some shifting between HR and finance, and there's been a lot of flux, so is this
Within the
overall
budget,
cost
within the
neutral?
budget, it's cost neutral, yes.
Just
Yeah.
clarifying, thank you.
Any other questions? Great. I will call for the vote. All in favor of approving this updated job description? That is 6-0 unanimous. Thank you. Okay, we're on to our exciting consent agenda.
Ooh, here it goes.
Does anyone want to bring anything off of the consent agenda? Hearing no response there, I guess this week we are gonna call, are we gonna do a motion and a second then for the consent agenda?
Sure.
I guess we are.
Yeah, I move to approve the consent agenda as outlined on the agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Sean's got the second. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you for that. Any final motions?
Motion to adjourn?
That's the one. Valerie, motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
second.
Catherine seconded. All in favor? All right, we need 4 people to sign the